Chapter 12 of Mag and Margaret, A Story for Girls, by Pansy. Recording is in the public domain. Peas and Picnics. Margaret Lancaster moved slowly down the stairs, crossed the wide hall, passed through the dining room, and came out on the back piazza. She looked as fresh as the summer morning in a dress of pale blue muslin with dainty lace at neck and ruffled sleeves. Her pretty hair that was almost the color of sunshine, curled about her neck and made damp little rings of itself on her temples. If it had not been for a look of discontent on her face, every one who noticed her would have been sure that she was pretty. The lines of ill humor, or whatever feeling it was that caused them, were more strongly marked this morning than usual. Mag Jessup was sitting on the steps with a great basket of green peas at her feet, and a small pan in her lap, from which she was shelling industriously. Margaret crossed to her side and stood looking down on her for a few minutes in silence. "Do you like to do that?" she asked at last. Mag gave a little start, as though her thoughts had come back from a long journey, and said, "The peas, do you mean? Oh, yes'm, very much." "I should think it would be awfully stupid work; baskets and pans full of them, all just alike, and all having to be popped and rolled out. I hate anything that goes on and on, without any end." Mag laughed pleasantly. "These have an end," she said. "Norah means that the last one of them shall be boiling before very long." "They are all just exactly alike," repeated Margaret discontentedly. "If I had been going to make peas, I would have had some of them square and some oblong, and all sorts of shapes and colors, just to give a little relief. I don't suppose you know what I mean." "Oh, yes'm," said Mag, a bit timidly. "I know oblongs. I found the word in my reading, and looked in the dictionary for it, and I made some oblongs out of pea pods, and some squares and triangles. But I don't think peas would be handy, made in that way. They wouldn't lie nicely together in the kettle to boil, and would take up a great deal more room." Margaret gave a half scornful little laugh. "You are a queer girl," she said. "I wonder where Mrs. Perkins picked you up. Do you have to shell all the peas that are eaten in this house?" "Almost all of them. Sometimes Miss Kate helps me when the gardener is late with them; and once Miss Ordway came down and helped me for quite a while; but I almost always do them alone." "Do they make you talk like that all the time?" "Like what?" asked Mag, looking up in surprise. "Why, saying 'Miss Kate' to Kate Perkins. She is nothing but a girl, and a boarding house keeper's daughter at that. I should think you would call her Kate, as the others do." Mag had no answer to this that she cared to make, so there was silence for some seconds. Then Margaret began again. "You make your fingers go fast, I must say. What a lot you have shelled since I stood here. I don't suppose it is shelling peas and such things that make your hands so brown, is it?" "Oh, no, ma'am, they were always brown. The sun makes them worse, I suppose, when I pick berries, you know, but brown is the color that belongs to them." Margaret laughed. "No, it isn't, you little goosie," she said. "If you had a chance to take care of them, they would be white, like that space below the line of the dress you have been wearing. This one is lower necked and shows the white below. You are awfully tanned, neck and face as well as hands and arms. But of course it doesn't signify. And so you are quite willing to keep on shelling peas all your life?" "No," said literal Mag, thoughtfully. "I shouldn't like to do it all my life, and do nothing else. I should be willing, though, to shell some peas every summer. It isn't such very stupid work, now that I have thought to make it into a kind of play." "Play! How on earth can you make a play out of shelling peas?" "Why," said Mag, a little pink flush spreading over her face, as it always did when she tried to tell anything about herself, "I make believe they are people. Sometimes I have them little children, ever so many, oh, hundreds and thousands of them, all dressed up fresh and clean, and going in great wagons for a picnic in the woods. They all come from the city, where there are no woods; and they don't have picnics. and I play that the pods are the cars that they come in, and I pop them out of the cars into the great hay wagon, like that one they used for the school children the other day, and I get so eager and excited, helping them all out and getting them safely into the hay wagon, that I almost forget that they are peas. Then when Norah takes a pan of them away and gives me another one, I say to myself, oh, here is another hay wagon all ready. I was afraid there wouldn't be room for all to go." Mag had by this time become so interested in her account as to almost forget who was her listener, until Margaret suddenly interrupted by a laugh that someway did not sound sweet, as all laughter should. "The idea!" she said. "If that doesn't sound for all the world like a half-witted creature, or a crazy one. It is really more like the talk of insane people. If you don't take care, they will be carrying you off to the country house for a crazy pauper. I wonder if you would make play out of that? Well, go on, what else do you make believe?" But Mag was silenced. Not for the world would she have told this contemptuous Margaret another word about the picnic. Whatever happened to the children after that, she would have to imagine for herself. "What a disagreeable little thing you are!" Margaret said at last, having tried in vain to get more of the story. "And what a poky place this is! I wish Fred Ainsworth had been in France with his father and mother before he coaxed my aunt to come out here instead of going to Asbury Park as I wanted to. I wonder where Fred is? Have you seen him since breakfast?" "I think he has gone to the grove with Thomas. At least, Thomas has gone to see about a good place to build the tables for the picnic. And when he drove up just after breakfast, Mr. Frederick was in the wagon with him." "Mercy! Gone away out to the grove! Why, they won't get back until afternoon. That is just like Fred, coax me out to this backwoods, and then run off and leave me to pass the time away as best I can. Why do you call him Mr. Frederick? Did he tell you to do that?" "No, ma'am, but Mrs. Perkins did. She said that was the way that little girls should speak of young gentlemen like him." "Young gentlemen!" mimicked Margaret, with another laugh that jarred. "The idea of calling Fred Ainsworth a young gentleman! He is nothing but a boy, and a very tiresome one, sometimes, if he is my own cousin. To be sure, he is a few years older than I; but then girls grow up a great deal faster than boys. How old are you?" "I will be 14 in December," said Mag. "The idea! I don't believe it. You are just hoaxing." "I don't know what that word means," said Mag, with quiet dignity, "but I know I always tell the truth. I will be 14 the 7th day of December." "Well, if I ever saw such a little runt in my life! Stand up here, and let me see how much taller I am. More than a head, and I'm not tall for my age. Why, Mag Jessup, you are older than I am, and look at the difference. I should think you would want to go to school and learn things, and not be such a dunce at your age. But I suppose you couldn't do it if you wanted to ever so much. Haven't you any folks of your own at all?" Mag shook her head, and the peas suddenly danced before her eyes through a mist made of tears that wanted to come. Sometimes it seemed too dreadful to this lonely little girl that she had "no folks at all." "Well," said Margaret, after a moment's silence, "then I suppose it doesn't matter much about your knowing things. Servants do not have to be educated, and you will have to be a servant, I presume, always. They are very good, useful people, I am sure." This she said with an honest desire to comfort the little brown girl whose eyes she saw were dimmed with unshed tears. Then she murmured once more that she did wish Fred Ainsworth had known enough to stay at home and amuse her. It was the least he could have done after bringing her to such a barbarous place. After that she sauntered off, and lounged in the hammock under the chestnut trees with a book. Mag Jessup finished her peas and carried them to Norah. Her face was grave, and during all the rest of the shelling she knew in her sorrowful little heart that they were peas, and not happy children in fresh dresses being tumbled into fragrant hay carts. Having parted company with them, she set the tables in the great dining room, and rubbed the silver, and scraped the potatoes, and polished the glasses, and did dozens of other very useful things, without once attempting to make the silver into English lords and ladies, with the kitchen knives for their servants, nor considering the polished glasses great pearls and diamonds that the lords and ladies were to wear. They were just dishes, and she was a servant, and was always to be a servant. That part was not so hard to poor Mag as the information that servants did not have to know things. Down deep in the heart of this little girl was a desire to know things; to go to school sometime, and become almost as wise, perhaps, as Mr. Frederick himself. Of course it would take years and years, but she had actually allowed her mind to dream much in that direction. She did not hint to Margaret Lancaster that she, the young woman who was helping all those children into the hay wagons, was actually their teacher, who had come to the country with them for the purpose of caring for and giving them pleasure. She would not for the world have breathed the great secret, yet this was really the height to which her imagination had led her. And now, behold, she was always to be a servant, and servants did not have to be educated. She considered that problem all the while she was polishing the glasses. She was painfully afraid that Margaret Lancaster was right. Norah was not educated. She had asked her once something about Queen Elizabeth, and she had declared that she never heard of her, and didn't believe there was any such queen. Jane, the chambermaid, had stood her test no better. And as for Joe, he could not even read. The more Mag thought about it, the more sorrowful she grew. Perhaps servants ought not to be educated, and perhaps God had planned that she should be a servant. Life certainly had many hard places for poor Mag. Only that morning, sitting among the children, helping them from the cars into that splendid shining wagon, she had been so happy, and had assured herself earnestly that some day, when she knew a great deal, and had earned a lot of money, she would bring a carload of children to the country, and do just these lovely things for them. And then Margaret Lancaster had come and put out her sunshine. It was August, and Mrs. Perkins had been at her country boarding house since the 1st of June. Quite a number of her city boarders had come with her; among them, much to his disappointment, Frederick Ainsworth himself; that is, he was disappointed that his father and mother, instead of returning home that spring, as he had hoped, must still remain abroad. But if he must board, he preferred Mrs. Perkins to making new acquaintances, and the out-and-out country, as he called it, rather than any famous seaside resort. So he had coaxed his Aunt Helen, with whom vacations were to be spent until his parents returned, to come to Riverview Cottage with Mrs. Perkins. This was, as had been seen, much to his cousin Margaret's disgust. She wanted to go instead to the Revere House at Asbury Park, and never wearied of telling Frederick what fun it had been, last summer, to sit in the parlors during the hops and watch the dancers. His cousin Margaret was also in charge of her Aunt Helen, for her mother was abroad, seeking health for an invalid son. So Aunt Helen, besides her own little daughter Natalie, had the care of Margaret and Frederick for the season. Little Mag Jessup would have been astonished over the idea that any one should have to care for Mr. Frederick, but the truth was that his Aunt Helen considered him quite a responsibility, and was often anxious about his future. Miss Ordway was also for a few weeks at Riverview Cottage, and expected, in a very few days, certain friends of hers, toward whose coming Margaret Lancaster was looking with the deepest interest. She had confided to Mag Jessup the news that they were very rich, and had magnificent clothes, and no end of jewelry, and had been abroad for years. Mag rejoiced in all these things. She loved to look at people who wore pretty clothes, and she loved the sparkle of jewels, and she rejoiced, above all things, in the thought that she should see people who had "been abroad." For she had learned that abroad meant, perhaps, the places where all her dear lords and ladies in the English history lived and flourished. What could not people who had actually been there tell her about them, if only she could manage to ask a few questions, or perhaps overhear their talk when they were telling others? Besides these old acquaintances and expected friends, there were a dozen other boarders, most of them quiet, elderly ladies, who liked Riverview Cottage because it was quiet. Margaret Lancaster disliked it for that very reason, although there were 2 or 3 pleasant young fellows of her cousin Frederick's age, and a couple of pleasant girls a year or 2 older than herself. For some reason that Mag Jessup did not understand, Miss Margaret did not take kindly to these young people, and openly announced that she "hoped with all her heart" the expected comers would not be "so stupid." No wonder Mag had planned a picnic for her thousands of little city children, for the air was full of picnic plans. Hay wagons, too, were to be called into service. The very next day the young people from the cottage were invited to join a party of young people from the village, and drive to a certain bend in the river, near which was a lovely grove of wide spreading trees, and a natural table made of stone, upon which to spread the good things they would take thither in baskets; to say nothing of numberless easy chairs, settees, cozy corners, and any other pet name one chose to give the seats that had, at some time in the long ago, apparently been hewn out of solid rock. It required some imagination to see a strong resemblance always to easy chairs and cushions; but Mag Jessup, who longed exceedingly to get a view of the enchanted spot, and who never could get time to tramp the 5 miles and view it for herself, found no difficulty in imagining just how the stone furniture looked, and indeed would have been able to people the rocks with kings and queens and dukes of the long ago, if she had been called upon. Poor Mag! The nearest she expected to come to the picnic was to seed the raisins and beat the eggs for the cakes that were being made for the occasion, and do 100 other small things toward their getting ready. Of course no one thought of such a thing as Mag Jessup going to the picnic. Mag looked with much awe upon Margaret Lancaster, because she curled her lip at the whole affair, and pronounced it "country to the last degree." What wonderful things must Margaret have enjoyed, if she could despise such a day's pleasure as this? Such was Mag Jessup's reasoning. Chapter 13